think we can go ahead and get started with some introductions at least, and hopefully people will be signing on in the next few minutes as well. But wanted to say hi to you all. My name is Takami Clark. I'm guiding us through this presentation. I represent Big Sky Public Relations, and we work with the Montana Department of Transportation on communications for a bunch of different projects and studies. So you might have seen my name floating around before in the community. I am the communications manager for this study, and I will be available should you ever have any questions. MDT has hired us to help in a number of different ways, including creating press releases for the media, hosting public meetings like this one, and just communicating with you all. So normally this meeting would be hosted in person, but due to COVID-19 and our concerns for the public, we have decided to host a virtual meeting. So I know this isn't ideal, but hopefully it kind of helps a little bit to just help that conversation along. Also here with me in this presentation is Project Manager Jason Sen and Butte District Administrator Bill Fogarty of the Montana Department of Transportation, as well as Phil Forbes of Morrison Merrily. Would you all like to say hi?
Hello, everyone. This is Jason Sen. As Takami said, I'm MDT's project manager for this project.
Good morning, Bill Fogarty. I'm the MDT Butte District Administrator.
Good morning, everyone. This is Phil Forbes. I'm with Morrison Merrily and managing this particular study, along with a number of sub-consultant experts that are helping us identify the issues and work through our study.
All right, and I also wanted to introduce Katie Cleats from Big Sky Public Relations. She's going to be monitoring any questions or comments that come through the Q&A system. We're not going to be monitoring anything in the chat box, and I don't think that's a function. So please feel free to type any questions or comments in the Q&A box throughout the meeting. If you do see that someone has a question that you also wanted to ask, you're welcome to use the thumbs up feature as well. Just give us an indication that you're thinking of that question as well. Katie, do you want to say hi as well?
Good morning, everyone. As Takami said, I'll be monitoring that Q&A box, so I might respond to you directly, and then at the end, all of our panelists will be able to answer your questions. Looking forward to it.
All right, and again, I am Takami. I'm serving as the communications manager for the Highway 84 East of Norris Corridor study, and I am here if you ever want to share any thoughts or have any questions. My contact information will be shared at the end of the presentation should you ever want to get in touch. And the last thing I wanted to mention was that we are recording this presentation and placing it on the webpage for viewing after these meetings. So I really appreciate everyone who has tuned in today to meet with us, and I would like to now turn things over to Bill.
Good morning, Bill Fogarty again. I'll talk a little about corridor studies. These studies they occur early in the planning process. We use studies to explore options for improving the road. Construction is not guaranteed. We may find that all our options are too costly to pursue. Studies help MDT identify feasible solutions. This involves finding the most cost-effective approach to enhancing safety. We identify all possible options and then explore whether construction is possible and how much those options might cost. Roadways that can benefit from safety improvements are nominated for this project process. Crash history often informs us on what changes may need to occur. Without studies, solutions may only address part of the roadway or may not be the most cost-effective option for the road. These studies are also helpful in laying the groundwork for future work. If we do move forward with an option, we use the information from the study to scope the work appropriately. I'll introduce Jason Sen, MDT's project manager for this corridor study.
So just a quick overview on the study. The study is looking at 3 miles of Highway 84 between the Warm Springs Boat Launch and the Red Mountain Campground. It's highlighted in red on that slide there. And MDT has hired the consultant firm Morrison Merrily to conduct the study because Morrison Merrily is able to dedicate more resources to this project than MDT could, which allows them to find the best solution quicker. And traffic on this corridor continues to grow, so addressing this concern is a priority. This area is known for its narrow roads and curves along the Medicine River. A number of the crashes have occurred along these curves, which has prompted the study. And as many people on this call are probably familiar with these curves we're referring to, they are very sharp and require quite a reduction in speed. This study is going to determine if there is a better way for traffic to navigate these curves that reduces the amount and severity of crashes. So MDT has already completed a safety project out there where we've installed truck barrier rail, rumble strips, flashing lights, and some signage to help with the safety on this corridor, specifically on those curves. But unfortunately, we continue to see crashes out there. And so that's why this study is so important. We really need to see what else can be done to enhance the safety. So now I'd like to turn it over to Morrison Merrill's project manager, Phil Forbes.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning again, everyone. This is Phil Forbes. And as you can see there on the screen for the timeline, Morrison Merrill is in the process of developing some feasible concepts to increase safety, such as improving the ability for drivers to see the road ahead, adding shoulders, reducing the sharpness of the corners, etc. We are using our study partners that I mentioned earlier just to gather information on existing conditions. For example, we've done a survey of the topography. Our geotechnical consultant has done some borings in the roadway and is doing some investigation on some field work that they've completed. We're having cultural and biological resources identified, wetland delineations completed, and we're assessing the recreational uses in this corridor. We can then move on to looking at geometric changes to the roadway that would increase safety, and yet we'll have a better understanding with this background information of the difficulty of construction, the costs, and the impacts to resources in the area. We are not only researching the feasibility of construction, but we're also looking at the cost. We are not going to recommend changes where the cost is so high that the benefit to the public might be low, because we are spending public funds. As indicated on the screen, this fall, Morrison Merrill will present our findings in our feasibility study to MDT, and then MDT will be able to review that study and determine a plan forward. If a cost feasible option is found, and the study will move to the nomination phase. This is where MDT plugs it into their 5-year plan that is fiscally constrained. In other words, the costs have to be in keeping with the funding that's available. Because of their 5-year planning horizon, this is, if it becomes a project, 2026 would be the earliest opportunity to see any construction. Could be even later, depending on when funding sources may be identified, or it may not happen at all if a feasible solution is not found. Most of MDT's projects are completed with federal funding, and so we need to meet certain criteria in order to use those funds, things like environmental review and just a number of processes that we need to follow. Now I would like to again remind everybody that if you have questions or thoughts or suggestions, to please type them into the Q&A forum as we go along, and towards the end of our presentations here, we'll try to address them as best we can. Moving on to the next slide, we'd like to review briefly with you what options are we exploring. We've characterized them as carve into the landscape, realign the road to include a new bridge, realign it to simply go around the mountains, and a tunnel option. We'll explain these, go into a little bit more detail on the following slides. But it's important to keep in mind that at this point, it looks like all of the options are likely to be expensive. So we will try to identify one that is cost feasible and provides the greatest amount of benefit. Again, we would welcome feedback on any of these options as we go along, but it won't turn out to be a popularity contest. We're going to have to find an option that makes sense. On the next slide, we've tried to illustrate what we mean by carve the landscape. What you see up there is an example of a curve that would reduce the radius and make it a less severe curve. We've only shown the one here at roughly milepost 6.7. For those of you that are familiar with the highway, this part of the highway, that's where the rock outcropping, I believe, is 300 or 400 feet tall actually, and is right next to the road, which is right next to the river. So it's very constrained. We'll look at options that would carve back into that rock outcropping, as well as something similar down at milepost 5.8. On the next slide, I'd like to just generally describe what you see up there. Again, as Jason noted, the limits of this particular study are from milepost 5 to milepost 8, and 8 is just past the existing bridge over the Madison River. We're showing the two areas with the most severe rock outcroppings. They're at 5.8 and 6.7. The general limits of Warm Springs Boat Launch to Red Mountain Campground. The realignment options we have labeled up there as the east side and the west side. If we look first at the east side alternative alignment, the orange line, we'd be looking at any number of options where the road could be relocated. This particular one would require a new bridge across the Madison River, roughly there at milepost 6. After it crosses the river, it would go up a narrow coulee or draw, pass over into the other drainage, and then generally come back out on the existing highway at the intersection with Pole Creek Road. The east or the west side alignment, shown in blue on the screen there, would retain the current bridge's location, but follow a route generally west up existing Cold Springs Road before turning south at some point to cross over a bridge again and reconnect to the highway near milepost 2.2. On the next slide, this is one possible alignment for a tunnel. And this is the main option that we're looking at in terms of tunnel options. We've identified a whole host of variations of this. What we're trying to find is a tunnel alignment that allows us to improve the geometry of the roadway leading into and out of the tunnel. This one generally cuts through that rock outcropping at milepost 6.7. And with that, I think I would like to turn it back over to Bill Fogarty.
And I'll even unmute this time. So Vision Zero is the goal of 0 deaths and 0 serious injuries on Montana roadways. To make a significant impact on fatalities and serious injuries on all public roads in Montana, we also need the 5th E, which stands for everyone. We can use education, enforcement, emergency services, and engineering resources, but we can't do it without every Montanan. We want to bring Highway 84's crash frequency to 0. And with that, I'll turn it back to Takami.
Thanks, Bill. As promised, my contact information is here on this slide. Should you wish to touch base with any questions or comments after this meeting, you can always reach me by email at takami@bigskypublicrelations.com. That's takami@bigskypublicrelations.com. Or you can call our project hotline, which is 406-207-4484. And that hotline is staffed Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And if you'd like to stay up to date on how this study moves forward, you're welcome to email me and I'll get you on a list, and I will be providing updates to that list. You're also welcome to visit our website at bit.ly/highway84 to learn more about this study. I'm actually going to end the slideshow and just show you that really quick. So here is our webpage. Many of you probably accessed it to sign up for this meeting. But as you can see, there's a lot of helpful information on the page itself, as well as contact information on the side for all of us, just in case you need to reach us and haven't written that information down. And then a bunch of helpful links. We have a map, we have our brochure, just lots of helpful information there. Our rack card as well. And maybe you might have a question that we've already answered on our Q&A. And you can always go there for helpful information. Or there's also this flyer, which is advertising our open house, which you are at today. So you're welcome to visit this website at any time just to collect more information. I'll pull this slideshow back up as well. Scroll over. All right. And I'd also like to remind you guys that we've also created a survey. So if you don't really feel comfortable sharing your opinion in this type of format, you're going to actually be taken to the survey once you exit out of this meeting, and that'll pop up in a different tab, I believe. So you're also welcome to write down the link to the survey as well and just share your thoughts there. We'd love to hear from you, and definitely feel free to use that if you just prefer to fill out a survey. And now I would like to transition to answer any questions or respond to any comments that we've received. Again, feel free if you want to just share your comments and thoughts. You don't necessarily have to answer a question, and we will definitely read those and take those into consideration. So Katie, what questions do we have?
Thanks, Takami. So we have, it looks like 4 questions that have come in. The first was from Mr. Humphrey, who asked if a Jersey barrier or other type of divider is possible on this sharp curve. So I might throw that over to Phil and we can go from there.
Thank you, Katie. A central barrier certainly is one of the options that we're going to look at for improving the safety. As everyone knows, we're in a real tight spot here. There really isn't very much room between the rock outcropping, whether it's the single rock outcropping or just generally that mountainous terrain and the river. So we'll be looking at a median through there. The median itself represents something else to be crashed into. So we would expect it to be struck over time, a few times, but the seriousness of the accident involving a barrier would certainly be, we would expect to be less severe.
Great, thank you, Phil. If there's nothing more to add to that, I might go to the next question. And this is asking more about traffic patterns and crash statistics. So Paul has asked how many accidents involved trucks and how many involved out-of-state drivers that have never driven on the road. I'm not sure if we have all of that information at this time, but maybe we could share what we do have.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Paul, for the question. I don't believe that we have any information on whether the drivers involved in crashes are from the local area, out of state, their familiarity. So I'm pretty sure that that information is not available. As far as how many involved trucks, to be candid, I don't know the answer to that at this point, but would certainly look into that. Obviously, there are concerns about heavy trucks. So if I may, I'll just perhaps talk about trying to divert semi-traffic off of Highway 84. I think that's perhaps where your question was leaning. Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but you know, we do understand that the large trucks taking these corners are a concern for many. At the moment, certainly we are studying options that might help with that involve changes to the roadway. But I would remind everyone that as a primary route and a federal aid highway, it would be a violation of both state and federal laws to indefinitely restrict truck traffic on Highway 84. You know, this particular corridor serves as a farm to market route, as well as local deliveries for communities along the corridor. And we just can't restrict trucks from this route. So we are concentrating our efforts in this study at what we can do to improve the situation for everyone, including the trucks.
Great, thank you, Phil. I think that's really helpful. And if I could offer that maybe we can look into those crash statistics with trucks, and Takami could follow up. So if you wanted to provide your contact information, we'd be happy to circle back and get you the information that you're looking for. So next we have a question from Mr. Stem, and I'll read through all of this, then maybe we can figure out an answer from there. But essentially he's saying that all of our discussions from what he's heard today seem to be centered around some major construction projects that therefore will have to be put in the queue, as we had talked about, and take a long time to get the funding for them to be readily available to start construction. So in thinking about that, and due to the fact that the safety concerns are rising, Mr. Stem is saying that it seems like there might be an opportunity for a shorter term solution that could be done more quickly, while the longer term options are explored. Things like looking at speed, weight restrictions, as you mentioned, Phil, travel time, enforcement, etc. So maybe we could talk about, you know, if there is an option for something in the shorter term, and then what that could look like for the longer term aspect of this corridor.
Richard, that's quite a number of possibilities. Good questions all. Let me reiterate something that Jason Sen pointed out. I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago, the department had a safety project wherein they added the chevrons to advise drivers of the sharp corner they are about to encounter. They have a radar activated sign that advises drivers if they're going over the recommended speed through that corner. They've added rumble strips, including longitudinal and lateral rumble strips, to help drivers recognize that they're coming up on that corner. So they have done a number of things to try to improve the safety in that area. And just in a brief look at the crash rates, I do believe that some of those safety improvements have been effective. I'll try to touch base on a couple of items in your comment or statement. One relates to speed. That's a question that we often get. So I would say that the Montana law requires that speed limits be set by the Transportation Commission, the Montana Transportation Commission. And for them to consider a change in the speed limit requires a speed study, which would be done by MDT at the request of the locals. And in this case, that local entity would be the Madison County Commissioners. Whatever change might be proposed in the speed limit, it would have to be supported by the data from that speed study. In this particular instance, a request has already been made by the county commissioners to review the speed on 84. And the staff for MDT has been out collecting data already this summer and is in the process of compiling and evaluating that data, from which then they'll prepare a report to present to the Madison County Commissioners. So you probably should keep an eye on their agendas in the future. The speed limit studies, those changes are outside the process that we're currently looking at, but again, MDT is already aware of that and is conducting that study. One of the other items was increased enforcement, speed enforcement, presumably. And again, we certainly share your concern for safety on this corridor. We're not going to be making any recommendations to MDT as far as enforcement. That's really at the discretion of the patrolling agencies. Some of the roadway improvements that we would be addressing might help enforcement. It doesn't fit your short-term designation necessarily. As you know, there's essentially no shoulders in this area. So for enforcement to pull someone over under the current highway conditions is itself a bit of a safety problem. So that's kind of a tough nut. We would probably see an improved enforcement situation with the improvements if this ever becomes a project. Katie, I'm wondering if you could identify some other components of his question or comment that maybe I could address.
Sure, Phil. I think we hit most of that with your response. So he's talking about short-term solutions, which you explained. Speed. I think the only thing that we were missing there is essentially travel times and any weight restrictions that you might just want to clarify.
Well, travel time maybe goes to what I understand for those drivers who aren't familiar with Montana highways. You know, I believe it's quite likely that whether it's MapQuest or your Garmin, any kind of electronic device to help identify routes, they generally operate on they pick out the route for you that has the least travel time. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if this portion of Highway 84 is often identified for folks who aren't familiar with the area as the quickest way to get from point A to point B. I frankly don't know what we could do about that. And weight restrictions, again, I think is geared primarily towards truck traffic. Weight restrictions are generally put on a roadway because of lack of capacity in bridges or soft roadway conditions that would do damage. Just to generally have a weight restriction, I don't think is employed in Montana.
Okay, thank you, Phil. We're getting quite a few coming in, so I might move us on unless there's anything else that somebody wanted to add. I think I may have just interrupted someone. Okay, hearing none. Our next question is more of a comment and thinking about alternative areas or routes. So kind of piggybacking off of what you were just mentioning, Phil. So Mr. Humphreys asked that when there's road work or accidents on Highway 191, there's significant increases in traffic, therefore, than on Highway 84. So he's wondering if there are any alternatives to this.
Ron, I'm not sure how I could answer that question. I'd invite Jason or or Bill to jump in with some thoughts.
This is Bill. I'll make an attempt at that, Phil. I guess in general, you know, we see that occur. You mentioned both construction projects and accidents. So the Department of Transportation's pretty cautious in, I guess, identifying alternate routes or detours for a number of reasons. You know, we will identify the work that's going on. We do hire public involvement firms, public relations firms to help, you know, spread the word that we do have things going on, such as the US 191 corridor right now down near West Yellowstone. And then we educate the public and then let them make informed decisions, I guess, about what route they choose to take. But generally, the department's very cautious, as I said, for a number of reasons. You know, the US 287 corridor doesn't want to see any more truck traffic, of course, and neither does the US 191 corridor. And if a lot of folks had their way, their preference, trucks would remain on the interstates. But as Phil mentioned before, that's not within our authority. So I get that there would be an influx of traffic or changes in traffic patterns based on impacts such as accidents, but probably more likely influenced by construction on other corridors, and don't have an easy answer for that other than getting the word out and letting travelers make informed decisions.
Thanks, Bill. If there's nothing more on that topic, I might go to something a little bit new. So Jerry DeMarco has a great point that the cliffs near milepost 6.7 or Winter Wall or the drive-by crags are a major climbing area. So he's saying that therefore the carved proposal cuts right through what the climbing area is and would likely remove many of outcrops and have a considerable risk of rockfall on the road, which would then lead to the removal of even more material on the roadway. And then in addition, he's also saying that therefore the tunnel proposal would perhaps damage the climbing area and that there would be a risk of rockfall on the road at those entrances. So somewhat with that background in mind, he's curious to know if there are any details of how some of those issues might be handled in relationship to the rock climbing areas.
Thank you, Katie. Jerry, we are certainly aware of the rock climbing routes there, understanding that it's about the only open area for climbing enthusiasts in the winter, thus the Winter Wall, I guess, designation. We've heard that concern from climbers and do want to take that kind of recreational opportunity into consideration as we explore the options. We are truly trying to balance the views of everyone who has an interest in this area of the highway as we do our research. Can't really speak to how the climbing routes may be affected in the future. I'm not a climber, but I would like to think the different routes could be reestablished after the work is done, carving into the landscape. But setting that aside, in terms of the rockfall, one of the sub-consultants that I mentioned earlier that's helping us is a geotechnical firm that specializes in rockfall situations, and their task for this particular study is to look at what methods can be used both to do the rock scaling, cutting back the rock, and ensuring that future rockfall onto the highway or into the river is not a problem. They speak of rock catchment zones and the like. We've seen quite a bit of that kind of work through the state of late on the I-15 corridor, Wolf Creek Canyon. They have a number of techniques that could be used to keep rocks off the highway and out of the river. As far as the tunnel options, I believe this would be the first public road, if it were to happen, this would be the first public road tunnel in Montana. And there are a host of issues associated with the tunnel option, including rockfall at the entrances. There could be rockfall inside the tunnel unless it was lined. You know, there's lighting issues. There's certainly winter driving condition issues. I guess I would just conclude my response or thoughts by saying it is still way early in the process to be looking at details, but we will be considering your concerns as we look at the feasibility of the various options. I hope that helps.
Great, thanks, Phil. So our next question is if there's been any thought regarding bicycle safety as we approach this study.
Certainly bicycles are users of the highway. This particular highway doesn't have much room for bicyclists at the moment. Again, as we look at options for a host of reasons, we're looking at adding shoulders to the highway, which does a few things. It increases drivers' abilities to see ahead and anticipate what's coming. It gives people room to pull over if they break down. Shoulders also provide an opportunity for bicyclists to be a bit out of the traffic. So I would say we are trying to keep bicyclists and their safety in mind for the corridor, but would invite you to contact us, contact Takami with any specific ideas that you may have, how we could improve bicycle safety.
Perfect, thank you, Phil. So the next question that we have is kind of a statement that then leads to a question. So Mr. Calmer is positing that he thinks there are two root causes for accidents in the corridor: alcohol, which he understands is outside of what this study looks like, and the second is that speed, and he believes the drivers are distracted on this roadway. So with that in mind, he's wondering if there's an option that could look at essentially eliminating rubbernecking of drivers looking at the river. So something like a barrier wall that might be tall enough to obstruct the river view on this stretch of highway, or other things along those same lines to ensure that drivers are focused on the road as opposed to looking at the river.
Thank you, Katie. That's actually an interesting comment. We appreciate that. I think we'll take that into consideration, specifically the screen wall. And you are correct, you know, drivers' use of alcohol and distracted driving, that's a problem throughout the state, a little beyond the scope of the study that we're engaged in at the moment. But we will take into consideration your thoughts on eliminating part of the distraction, which is looking at the river, the rubbernecking, as you put it.
This is Bill. I guess I'd like to jump in just for a second. That's a great comment. Some sort of a visual barrier, and there are a lot of different configurations that, as some folks would probably say, that's why they drive the corridors. They want to see the river, so don't block it, or the beautiful scenery. But recent road trip I'd taken, we did encounter a number of barriers, and it does kind of focus your attention more on the roadway. So that's the whole idea of this open house, is to gather thoughts and comments, and that's a great one. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Bill and Phil. Next, we have a question asking if it would be possible, I think as a more interim solution, to look at adding additional signage in the area. So either additional signage for speed reduction warnings, or the possibility of looking at rumble strips in the area.
Again, that's a great comment, and one we can certainly take into consideration. I'm sure that will be passed on to MDT staff that is currently conducting the speed study. I think it's a great suggestion that they look at even additional signing warnings, rumble strips. So we will pass that along, and I'm sure the MDT folks with us here today will take that into consideration as well.
So this is Big Mouth Bill. I'll add just a little bit more to that so folks know, and Phil may have mentioned this, that the Madison County Commissioners have requested a speed study, and there is one underway. They're for a number of locations around Ennis, but also include this area. And so we personally took a tour of the signage and configuration, the advanced warning, speed limits, and so forth earlier this year, and we would expect to see comments back sometime later this fall. But all those things were discussed during that field review. And what'll happen then is when we get the recommendations back on the speed study, those will be returned to the Madison County Commission and for a 60-day comment period. And after that period passes, then their comments and their recommendation from the commission then is returned to the department.
Thanks, Bill. That's really helpful context. So I want to make sure that we're staying on track for time. I think we're doing great. So we have about 15 minutes left, and it looks like 8 more questions that are coming in. So our next question is essentially if there's been the opportunity to look at the possibility of splitting the road and creating a second bridge around the sharp corner. So Kendra is saying that another idea might be to create some sort of on or off ramp or turning lanes for the fishing access areas. And she also recommends that signage identifying fishing access, specifically the California Corner site, as well as the Warm Spring access that sits at the bottom of the two hills on either side, and that a turn lane would then potentially help if we looked at some of those different options. So I think back to her original question, which is, has the possibility of splitting the road and creating a second bridge around the sharp corner been discussed?
I may not have the same vision as Kendra. One of the options that we are looking at, though, is to improve the roadway geometry by, if you'll bear with me, having the roadway itself cantilever over the over the river just a bit, which would give us kind of a combination of scale back the mountain, some perhaps build a retaining wall along the river, and just be able to use up some of the space out over the river with the highway. If you have specific ideas that, you know, could be even sketched on a cafe napkin, that might be helpful, and I'd love to consider it. That's good information. Regarding the turn lanes and things, I should have mentioned earlier that MDT is working on a project. It's called the Madison River Turn Lanes Project in this same area. And the intent of that project is to provide a left turn lane into the Warm Springs boat launch site and over at the Blacks Ford fishing access. It's separate from this particular study, but one that also addresses safety in the corridor, as you've suggested. Unfortunately, I think the status of that particular project is that it's not currently funded within MDT's 5-year plan. But, you know, I'm sure that your comments and the need for the turn lanes is being considered as MDT updates that 5-year plan, I believe, on an annual basis. So it's certainly in the works, and a great comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. And so Kendra had a quick follow-up to that and saying that as you're thinking about the tunnel possibility, she's wondering if there's been any additional consideration around snowdrift. She said, as many know, the wind gets pretty wicked through the Bear Trap Canyon, and that she foresees a drifting issue in the winter.
That's again, a great comment and something that we will try to take into consideration. think our primary task, frankly, is to see if we can find that feasible option that works for most of the year, and keeping the snow drifting situation in mind certainly needs to be a part of our evaluation. So thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Next, Mr. Brody has asked if there's a realignment. Is it probable then that the existing portions of the roadway that remain would therefore get lower maintenance?
Good question. I think I'd probably turn to Bill for that, but I would expect that it would get less attention. Highway 84 itself is on what's referred to as the primary highway system, so it is a key element. And for example, winter maintenance, snow plowing and the like, the first priority I would certainly expect would be the realigned part of the highway. It's a little off your question, but I would say that we certainly would expect that all of the recreational access that's provided by the existing highway right now will be perpetuated. It'll always be there, but certainly won't get the attention that a primary highway, if it were realigned, would get.
And this is Bill. I would agree with those comments. That is a great question. There's opportunities, although it's too early right now at this point, but there could be opportunities to coordinate with other agencies and some of the, for a lack of better terms, I guess, abandoned, realigned roadway sections may be repurposed. And then if that were the case, the department would probably enter into an agreement with those entities regarding future maintenance. So there are possibilities for other uses of the abandoned sections of roadway should it come to that.
Perfect. Thank you both. So the next question that we have is again related to speed limits. So this attendee is wondering if there's any thought that's been given to just lowering the speed limit instead of going through a construction project.
Well, again, there is a speed study being conducted by MDT, literally as we speak, as we hold this open house. And I can tell you that at least one component of a speed study is to look at just how fast people are driving through the corridor today. And in my experience, they try to align the speed limit with that speed that most people are going so that you have good compliance. Lowering the speed limit beyond that is something I don't even know if it's a possibility, but I believe that making your concerns apparent to the Madison County Commissioners would be appropriate. And I think at this point, I would highly recommend that we wait for the speed study to be concluded and see what the recommendations are.
Yeah, and I agree. This is Bill again. One thing we do want to be careful of is speed differential. And so if we post a speed limit and then the perception to the majority of drivers is that it's not appropriate or they could actually go faster, that's where you get the speed differential compared to the folks that read the sign and say, no, it's told me to go 25 miles an hour, so that's what I'm going to go. So speed differential is a leading cause of accidents. If you're familiar with, everybody is obviously driving through construction zones in Montana. That's one of our concerns, is that we want to keep the speeds managed and get you through the project as quickly and safely as we can, and not pose those unnecessary differentials.
Thank you both. It looks like we have Just one final question, but folks, you're still welcome to throw anything into the Q&A chat and we'll be happy to address it for you. So the last question is for Mr. Brody, and he said that an option was thrown out, I think by you, Phil, that involved bridges, but that it wasn't necessarily mentioned. So Phil, could you maybe go back to that slide and talk about the options that might be appropriate for a bridge in this as part of this study?
Yes, thank you, Katie, and thanks for the question. I think in particular, if we look at that east side alternative alignment that's on the screen now, you can see where the orange line from milepost 6, it does cross the river right there, and that would require a brand new bridge. I would point out again that the existing highway and existing bridge would be left in place under this scenario so that we maintain the recreational access. But that is one option that has a bridge. And then we're looking at some options. Calling it a bridge is difficult even for me to understand, but there at milepost 6.7, there's a possibility that we can, again, hang out over the river a little bit by supporting the roadway on what essentially is a bridge. I'm trying to think of a good example that people might be familiar with, but it would require a pier, a number of piers, not necessarily in the water, but to provide us a platform to, again, cantilever the roadway out over the river. We've also just preliminarily looked at a different alignment that might cross the river twice, but I don't see that as being a cost-effective solution given the cost of bridges. I hope that gives you some indication of the options that involve bridges.
I jump in with Phil there. This is Bill again, but if you've driven I-90 west through Kellogg, Idaho, that's probably a great example of what it might look like to cantilever or be suspended above, I guess, and causing minimal impacts to the river. That's probably the best one I can think of if you happen to be familiar with the I-90 section.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you both. And it looks like at this time we don't have any additional questions. So Takami, I might turn it over to you. And then if anything pops through, I'll be sure to let everybody know.
Awesome. Well, again, we do have time, looks like just a couple more minutes if you wanted to submit a question. So I do welcome that, but you're also welcome to just contact me after the meeting, and you can, even if you don't have a question and you just have a comment, you're welcome to share that with me, and I will definitely share it with the rest of the team. I do really appreciate that effort that everyone came here today with, and all of your different thoughts and just your presence so that we can have this type of conversation. I know it's not ideal and it would have been nice to have met in person, but all of this feedback is incredibly valued by us, and we do really like to see what people care about. And I know I've been hearing a lot of folks talk about semi-traffic and speed, and it's really evident that a lot of folks on this call care about safety just like we do, and we will definitely take all of your comments into consideration and work hard for a solution. So I just wanted to thank everyone for their time today. You are welcome to sign off. Actually, it looks like one comment did come through.
It did. It just came through. So it's talking about the options for bridges and therefore cantilevering the road over. Mr. Uris has asked if the cost of cantilevering the road would be more than the other options.
I'm sure my answer won't be all that satisfying, but I don't know. In my experience, I would say that it will turn out, or it will prove to be more expensive than the other options. And by that, I'm kind of excluding the the east side and west side alternative alignments. Each of those is about 5 miles, 6 miles of brand new roadway. So that by itself is going to be pretty expensive. But I suspect if we're just going to compare the costs of carving into the rock outcropping or carving into the landscape versus a bridge to provide that cantilever option, I do believe the cantilever option is going to prove to be more expensive. But again, what we're trying to do is balance costs and balance all of the issues associated with making changes on this portion of the highway, be it recreational or cultural, biological. We're going to try to balance all of that along with cost.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. It looks like we had one last thing come in, but we are almost at time. So let me just read through this. Well, thank you for your comment, Kendra. We will definitely take this into consideration. And again, feel free to reach out, everyone. My contact information is on this slide, and you will also be taken to the survey if you want to leave comments there. And I really appreciate everyone hopping on today. Let's definitely keep this conversation going. Feel free to touch base afterwards. And I hope everyone has a good day and good weekend. Thank you so much.
This is Phil. I'd like to extend my thanks as well. Appreciate any new ideas, suggestions, comments. This is the perfect time in the study that we're engaged in to really be able to address them. Thank you.
I agree. Thanks, everyone. We appreciate your participation.
All right. Take care and so long.
Yeah, thank you.